Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to the Having Difficult Conversations COSI workshop. We have our guest speaker here, Elizabeth Saunders. And Elizabeth, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you. Okay, can you give me 2 minutes and then I might confirm with you though that I've done all my screen sharing and everything.
Of course.
Okay. Share my screen. And let me get this zoom out of here and let me put this up and do this. And let's get back up here. How am I doing?
Looks good.
Perfect. I'll put it in presentation mode. Oh, I don't know what this does. Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Saunders. I think you've probably heard my voice a few times, either last semester or this semester. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been a therapist for over 10 years, and I've been here at the Campus Counseling Center for just about 3 years. So yeah, I love talking about these topics. Many of the topics that we talk about, I know overlap a lot, but there are also themes that come up all the time amongst your peers who are coming into the counseling center. And so my hope is that people are able to take away a tip or two here or there. So today, we wanted to talk about healthy communication strategies and how those apply to navigating difficult conversations. So I think it'll probably take me, I don't know, I'm always open to questions or comments during or afterwards. During, I'm always kind of trying to switch screens and play movie clips. But if you have a question, always feel free to unmute and just say like, hey, I have a question. I'll try to check the chat, or at the very end, I'm happy to talk about anything that maybe was confusing or that you have other follow-ups about. Okay. So some objectives of today, just a few elements of healthy communication styles I'd like to touch on are the importance of cross-cultural communication, just a little clarification of terminology such as verbal versus nonverbal communication, direct versus indirect, social versus professional, things that come up in maybe more close relationships. And then we'll review skills needed for having challenging conversations, and most importantly, how we repair after a tough conversation or a miscommunication. I am gonna start by playing a little movie clip. I wanted to just put us in the right mindset for coming to any conversation or really any other human interaction that the gentleman in this video talks a little bit about. So using the term culture to really encompass basically any other human's different worldview, experience, or perspective. So not only thinking about culture as being about different regions of the world or even different states or even different neighborhoods, but things like socioeconomic status or even just someone's internal experience from a neurodivergent perspective. So let me play this film for you, or this little clip, and hopefully that'll get us all in a good mindset for thinking about that.
High above our heads is the International Space Station. It's an amazing, complex thing. The most complicated thing we've ever built in space, one of the most complex international projects ever conceived and ever completed. But the key word out of that is international. It is a place built by people from all around the planet, 15 different countries. And that just sounds sort of theoretical until you start thinking different languages, different units measurement systems. You know, is it inches or is it meters? Different electrical systems. Is it 220? Is it 110? Is it positive ground? Is it negative ground? But the most complex problem to deal with often is just people who have come from a wildly different cultural background, a completely different sense of what is normal. What do you do on a Friday night? What does yes mean? What does mean? You know, what is the day of worship? When do you celebrate a holiday? How do you treat your spouse or your children? How do you treat each other? What is the hierarchy of command? All of those things seem completely clear to you, but you were raised in a specific culture that is actually shared by no one else. Just if you have brothers or sisters, ask your brother and sister in detail about some stuff, and they will disagree with you. They have a different culture than you do. So imagine if the people that you're flying a spaceship with come from a wildly different part of the world. Trying to find a way to share a sense of purpose so that you can overcome the natural barriers of a difference of culture to do something really difficult. That's one of the biggest tasks that an astronaut faces. You can start just by learning language. It's obvious if it's as discrete as learning English or learning Russian or learning Japanese, that's a clearly defined language. But have someone from Louisiana talk to someone from Brooklyn. They both speak English, but the language is very different. And if you want to speak clearly and communicate with that person, you have to recognize that the culture with which they interpret the world is absolutely necessary for you to understand if you want to clearly communicate with them. And for me, the only real measure of clear communication and successful communication is a change of behavior of the listener. If all they did was go, uh-huh, then you have no understanding of whether they actually comprehended and internalized what it was you were trying to communicate to them. But if you can see that their actions now reflect a different idea, and then you can measure whether what you were intending actually got communicated across, then the loop is complete, and you've successfully crossed whatever cultural barrier was there. And so that requires a lot of extra effort. Learning to speak the language, learning to express yourself in a way that is meaningful to the person you're talking to, and then doing it on a frequent enough basis to be able to see that your message got through and see that that person is doing what it was that you were talking to them about, seeing a change of behavior so that you know for sure that the two of you are on the same page of this new thing that you're doing. It's complex, it's not natural, it's difficult, but it's necessary. And the higher the stakes are, if you're doing something that is life or death, or doing something that has big financial consequence, then the necessity to communicate effectively and clearly just continues to skyrocket, continues to go up. And it really puts more pressure on your own shoulders to learn to be a good communicator, but also learn to be as sensitive and aware as you possibly can of the people that you're speaking with. Try and overcome all of those natural barriers. Try and accomplish something together, no matter where you're from.
Okay, so I think that's a really good foundation for us to start out from. I'm gonna pull up my notes again. So if we all come to a space of feeling like any human we're about to interact with is coming from a different culture, I think that naturally helps put us in a mindset of curiosity, which is always a healthy place to start a conversation from. So I didn't really know where to put this slide. We're going to jump to this as well. But I think thing number 2 is then once you're being curious about someone's culture, again, using culture very openly, is the next most important thing is our attempt to not take anything personally. I have a favorite book. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz called The 4 Agreements. Agreement number 2 agreement number 1 is, oh, it's over on my shelf, but it's about being clear and concise in communication to yourself and others. Agreement number 2 is to not take anything personally, and sort of taking the philosophy of nothing others do is because of you. What others say and do is in fact a projection of their own reality. If you become immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. From a neurologic standpoint, and we'll see a little clip about this further on, our brain changes when we feel in a fight or flight or a defensive mode. And so by kind of not absorbing something and taking it personally, we also help regulate our brain so that we can stay in a place of openness and keep our heart rate down and be able to continue a conversation without it escalating. So, starting from a place of cross-cultural appreciation. Number 2, coming from a place of attempting not to take things personally. And then we'll just move into some clarification or making sure we're all using a similar vocabulary. So verbal communication is, of course, expressing thoughts or ideas through speaking or writing. Nonverbal communication are other methods of communication, such as our facial expression, gestures, and body movements. For a crash course, in those who have not taken other communications courses, we all know how these things can be helpful and hurtful. So we can certainly, there are pros and cons to using all of these strategies. And I think as I'm going through all these slides, like verbal or nonverbal, direct and indirect, personal, professional, trying to maybe move away from a paradigm of good or bad or right and wrong, but sort of just in what situation could this be helpful or hurtful, and how can I modify or adjust accordingly? Other language we use when talking about communication is direct versus indirect. So pros of direct communication is that it often promotes a sense of clarity and reduces the chances for someone to misunderstand. However, the cons of direct communication is that it may more easily lead to conflict, depending on how artfully we craft our direct communication and whether a person is in a place to hear that. Same with indirect communication. So these might be things like, probably this more comes across in the written word. So maybe more through texting or emailing or kind of strategies of communication like that. And the art of those, or maybe the pros, is that they can be a little more subtle. People are less likely to get their feathers ruffled, but then there's a chance that your voice is not heard or someone misunderstands what you're saying. So choosing the right approach depends on understanding individual styles, cultural factors, and context, of course. So again, not good or bad. I think there's room for using all of these options in different scenarios. And again, just one more terms review of getting us in the mindset of professional versus social. So to distinguish, for the sake of this conversation today, to distinguish business communication or professional communication as more structured, getting clear on your goals, using concise language appropriate to the environment, versus our social communication, which tends to include more emotional building exchanges that might include things like humor or subtext. Okay, so another place, well, I guess I put in relationships. I'll share a little bit more. John and Julie Gottman are pretty well known in my field of psychotherapy. They're a husband-wife couple who, back in the 1990s, late 90s, early 2000s, established sort of a lab for observing people in romantic relationships, where things went wrong. So the people would actually go be observed in like an apartment type setting, and they collected data on, I think, tens of thousands of couples. They were heteronormative couples generally, due to sort of the context of the times. They have tried to expand their research and become more up to date in noting that not all romantic relationships obviously fall into that category. But it was a useful pool of data, as no one had necessarily observed human couples in that depth before. From that, they've developed a lot of what we use in couples counseling in this profession, and have come up with some different strategies. So I do want to pull up this infographic. It is the conflict blueprint. And so really what this does is helps couples navigate through when they're in a gridlocked situation. I think these strategies absolutely apply to non-romantic relationships. They apply to parent-child relationships, to friendship relationships, to conversations with supervisors. They all have to start from a place of listening and validation. I went to a talk a few years ago, and the person giving the talk defined listening as a willingness to change. So a person is ever really only listening as much as they are willing to make a change after hearing what the person has said. You know, we hear all the time about listening to respond. This is the opposite of that. So, this exercise encourages people to take increments of 10 minutes and to actually hold a notepad so that we can remain neutral and, again, try to really practice our listening skills. So, when it's the speaker's turn, it's being of that place of being very thoughtful. So instead of using you statements, using I statements, things like, you are such a lazy slob, not as great as I feel disrespected when shoes are left all around the house, right? So it's an I feel statement versus a you are statement. This is a lot of feeling talk. So again, in my example, I feel disrespected. It's sharing from a place of this is the emotion that this brings about in me, and gives us an opportunity to own our part of the situation as well. So the listener's job, which is very hard as humans, is to postpone our perspective. In this made up scenario where someone is leaving shoes around, the person coming in leaving shoes around probably has a really good reason for doing that. I worked 12 hours. I was super hungry when I came home because I didn't get to eat lunch. This is my house too. I should be able to put my stuff wherever I want. So the hardest part of this exercise is the person who's not speaking first to put that agenda off to the side and be able to understand what it's like to be in the other person's side of the situation. Validating, again, validating isn't necessarily conceding that another person is right, but it's saying like, I've been in a situation where I have had the emotion of feeling frustrated at someone else's actions. So that emotion makes sense to me. We're not still saying, you know, my shoes are not necessarily always going to go here, but I get the feeling that it has made you have. We'll go through a separate part. So as we're going down this left side, it starts with this listening and back and forth, showing a place of understanding, knowing when to take a break to self-soothe, and then asking a bunch of questions. So figuring out, again, if we go back to that second side, what a person is bringing to a conversation is usually a lot less about you and a lot more about something in their past. So not that we have to be psychotherapists and investigate the reason for everyone bringing every problem, but it is to get a little curious, like, oh man, that's right. This is the nicest house you've ever owned. It's the first house you've owned. And this carpet that you bought for the entryway is a special one that came from your grandma. I get that. I had not really thought about all those things together, right? So it's thinking through, it's getting an understanding of like what that other thing that they're bringing to the conversation is that actually probably has very little to do with you and us practicing that same thing. Then this helps us come to what areas are flexible within this, like, oh, I get it. It's about the carpet, has special meaning. Can I still take my shoes off somewhere else and not leave them on that carpet, right? So this allows the log jam to kind of clear a little bit and make room for that compromise. And then we'll talk about the most important step, which is they call it the aftermath of a regrettable incident or the aftermath of a fight. We're going to talk about it as repair. And I have a little clip to go with. So, okay, so we have gone through this one. How do I make that go away? Let's see. Come back to this one. So again, it's directly expressing thoughts and feelings, trying not to use blame language. This one didn't come up at that flow, but as we all know, we've been in that argument with someone that goes from like, I'm just gonna keep using this leaving shoes in the middle of the living room example, that it turns into, hey, remember how we talked about not leaving your shoes in the middle of the living room? Oh yeah, well, how about when you leave all your dishes in the sink? That is in fact a separate conversation. So being really thoughtful when we're pulling in lots of different things, trying to just stick with one situation at a time. And then using all the stuff we've talked about in the previous slides. So communication is the key, staying open-minded. So listening to have your mind changed, not listening to change someone's mind. And always assuming that people are coming from a place of either good intentions or baggage that isn't really about you. Okay, that was my relationship counseling in a nutshell. I just have to see if I can find my other tabs here. Anyone have any questions or thoughts as of this point before I launch into the next thing? So I pulled 5 skills. Oops, yeah. I pulled 5 skills out of this for us to really focus on. So one of the skills needed to engage in all sorts of conversation, but especially difficult conversations, is informed consent. So I think we often hear about informed consent when we're talking about intimate relationships. Super important. If we need a quick review in that, we're always looking for enthusiastic yeses. As it pertains to lots of other areas of life, I find that using that same mindset pertains to difficult conversations. And one of my favorite organizational psychologists, Adam Grant, breaks this down into 4 steps. So he calls it how to disagree without being disagreeable. So number 1 is, again, coming to a conversation with respect that the other person has some sort of valuable component to their view. Even though it's wildly different than yours, where can I find the piece of that view that I have respect for? Step number 2 is about this informed consent piece. I love how he phrases it. It's asking for permission to challenge somebody's ideas. He says, can we dance around this topic? You might find another way that works for you. But I just think about things that I hold very dear, and maybe you all can think about those things as well. Sometimes those are spiritual convictions. Sometimes they're political or societal convictions. And how do we usually feel the second someone's coming to try to change that view of ours? We immediately get really defensive and protective of those. And even more so when we're kind of blindsided. I'm sure we've all been in that situation where we thought we were meeting with someone under the context of, oh, this is going to be a fun meet up at the park to kick the soccer ball around. If I'm going under the premise that we're just going to kick the soccer ball around and then someone starts challenging my deepest held convictions without asking my informed consent, it's probably not going to be a super productive conversation because we're immediately going to be thrown into a defensive state. So, moving on to number 3. So finding a phrase that, again, asks permission to just push on those beliefs a little if you think maybe you two can find some common ground. So saying something like, I'd love to pressure test that, or is there a soft spot in that, or a part of your belief that you're struggling with, or part of this situation that you can see a flaw in, right? So just sort of seeing if they're seeing a little bit of what you are. And then again, just circling back to the importance of listening, listening to be curious rather than already listening to respond. Okay, so skill number 1, informed consent. Skill number 2, oh wait, did I have something else? No, that's it. Skill number 2, the art of active listening. So I use this all the time as a therapist. In active listening, we're putting phones and distractions down. We are engaged in that present moment. I I remember going through graduate school to sort of practice and learn active listening. It wasn't something that necessarily came naturally to me before becoming a therapist, and it felt really cheesy. So I just want to put out there that it might feel really cheesy when you first start doing it. It might be something like, oh my gosh, when I walked into work today, my boss didn't even say good morning. They just walked over to my desk and plopped a pile of papers down. I mean, can you believe it? So that's what the person's saying. To active listen to that, we may do things like saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe your boss didn't say good morning to you. It sounds like that really hurt your feelings. I don't know if that was like supernatural, but it's sort of that skill set of being able to summarize a little what the person said, find the emotion in it, find the key point that really seems to be rattling them. And maybe asking a few questions like, that's really weird. Like, did your boss say good morning to all your other coworkers? Or is this something that, you've noticed happen before? So let's add to this scenario and say, maybe this person is always complaining to you about their boss. And the second that they say, oh my gosh, can you believe my boss, ... We might immediately want to say like, oh, why are you complaining about your boss again? Why don't you just quit your job, right? It's withholding that judgment until the person feels really listened to. Again, I think there are probably a couple different mindsets saying like, why should I let somebody complain for 10 minutes if I'm still going to say the same thing? But human beings get a lot of benefit from feeling validated and heard first. It is so much easier to change someone's mind from a place of them getting to the point. I don't know, I almost feel like it's like a hill. Like they need to climb up the hill to get to the top. And then if you've ever heard someone just like, I think they're the people that will vent for like an hour, and there's definitely some limits that need to be set there. But if someone can kind of blow off some steam for 10 minutes, you can sometimes feel them naturally sort of burn out. And then that's the point to say like, gosh, it sounds really exhausting. And it feels like a story I've heard before. I wonder at what point you might decide that something needs to change, right? So, okay, so to just reverse back out of that active listening, it's being present for that moment, not letting someone steamroll you, but kind of give it 5 or 10 minutes to sort of reflect back, make sure we're hearing where they're coming from. And if we're the speaker, also being thoughtful of those things, noticing maybe when we are just kind of vomiting on other people, and it's crossed the line of just sort of relieving some stress, or it's pushing on boundaries as well. Okay, so skill number 3. When I was going through that relationships worksheet and talking about how to self-soothe, let's use this same example of the person who is complaining about their job to somebody else. The somebody else might be getting more and more irritated and get that feeling of like, this is so frustrating. All this person does is complain all the time, or they need to solve this problem, or whatever feelings we might be having about it. We have to have that ability to notice what's happening inside of us and to self-regulate. So I'll play this little video. I was talking about John and Julie Gottman. Julie is the wife of John, and in this little 2-minute video, she shares about what happens when we get flooded and how to deal with it.
Now, flooding is really important, people, because in flooding, as Dan Siegel has talked about, people flip their lid. I love that metaphor. It's absolutely perfect. When people flip their lid, as Dan says, people can't think. They feel attacked. They hear attacked. Their partner may be saying, want to go out to dinner? They feel attacked. They see attack, and they respond with fight or flight. They either get very angry, aggressive, attacking, or they completely shut down. We found in the research that 80% of our stonewallers who shut down were men. Not because men are better or worse or anything else, but because men through evolution have been trained to be vigilant. They're vigilant, right? They're looking for that saber-toothed tiger. They're protecting their family. Well, the wife has now become the saber-toothed tiger. So they get flooded, and it's hard to calm down. It's hard to calm down. So the only way to calm down, we have to have our partners in front of us do that, is they have to take a break. The break has to be for 20 to 30 minutes at least, and they do not think about the fight. They don't think about what they could say better, because as long as they keep thinking about it, they're going to stay escalated. Before they separate for their break, they have to tell the partner when they're coming back, so the partner doesn't feel abandoned. Then they can go and do something self-soothing, meditate, like John Kabat-Zinn talked about yesterday, or read a book, read a magazine. Don't read a mystery novel with murder in it. No. Maybe watch TV, but not The Wire. So, there's ways of self-soothing, doing yoga, going for a run, and so on. Self-soothing, taking their mind off it. When they come back, they're new people. It's a totally new conversation. That is what people need to do when they get flooded. So that's the antidote to flooding.
Okay. Oops. So, okay, so I think that's probably one of the skills I talk about most in counseling and therapy appointments. I can from my own perspective attest to times when I've been really dug into an argument, and almost me saying like, I need to take a time out and walk away can feel like in that moment, like I'm conceding, like I'm letting the other person win. We really have to try to fight that feeling and know that our brain can work more effectively after that break. As Julie Gottman is explaining, when we get escalated, so in couples appointments, they'll actually have each couple wear a heart oximeter on their finger. And if their beats per minute or their pulse rate increases above 100, I think it's 100 beats per minute, they will take a break even from the counseling center conversation or the counseling appointment conversation. And everyone has to do a self-soothing activity that decreases their heart rate again, because there have been brain scans that show that literally our frontal lobe, which is where our most reasonable thinking takes place, loses blood flow when we become escalated. So if it helps to tell your ego, like, I need to take this break because I need to restore blood flow to the front of my brain so that I can bring my best arguments, that's great. In some ways, it will help everyone's nervous system come down and have a lot more productive of a conversation. Okay, skill number 4. This is one more kind of longish video, but the most important part of all of this is, and I should have done the next slide first. So compassion. Every single human is going to make communication errors, and repairing communication errors is the real skill, not perfection. So it's going to happen. People are going to misunderstand you. You're going to misspeak. I heard a really funny or saw a funny meme. There's something, there's a saying that says to use the acronym HALT, don't engage in important decision-making or hard conversations if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, HALT. But what the meme said is, well, when am I supposed to have those conversations then? Sort of implying that in our current culture, we're all probably one of those 4 things a lot of the time, and especially for you all in school and working and with families, etc. But the communication errors are going to happen. So we have to have compassion for them. But the skill we really need, and if we can become masters at these skills, then when they do inevitably happen, we won't feel like failures. So I'm going to play this last clip to sort of see us through to the end of this. And then we will wrap up.
Relationships can usefully be looked at through the prism of a concept much used within psychotherapy, the idea of rupture and repair. For psychotherapists, every relationship is at risk of moments of frustration or, as the term has it, of rupture, when we suffer a loss of trust in another person as someone in whom we can safely deposit our love and whom we believe can be kind and understanding of our needs. The ruptures are often quite small and to outside observers perhaps imperceptible. One person fails to respond warmly to another's greeting. Someone tries to explain an idea to their partner who shrugs and says offhandedly that they have no idea what they're on about. In front of friends, a lover shares an anecdote which casts the partner in a less than flattering light. Or the rupture can be more serious. Someone calls someone a stupid fool and slams a door. A birthday is forgotten, an affair begins. The point about ruptures is that they say nothing in themselves about a relationship's prospects of survival. There might be constant, rather grave ruptures and no breakup. Or there might be one or two tense moments over a minor disagreement and then things head towards collapse. So what determines the difference is something that psychotherapists are especially keen to teach us about, the capacity for what they term repair. Repair refers to the work needed for two people to regain each other's trust and restore themselves in the other's mind as someone who is essentially decent and sympathetic and can be a good enough interpreter of their needs. As psychotherapy points out, repair isn't just one capacity among others. It is arguably the central determinant of one's mastery of emotional maturity. It is what identifies us as true adults. Good repair relies on at least 4 separate skills. Firstly, the ability to apologize. A sorry may not be as easy as it sounds, for it isn't just a few warm words one has to say. The true cost is to one's self-love. If one's already on the verge of finding oneself somewhat intolerable, then the call to concede yet another point, to own up to being still more foolish, emotionally unbalanced, controlling, hot-tempered, or vain, can feel like a demand too far. We may opt to dig in and avoid a sorry, not because we're overly pleased with ourselves, but precisely because our unworthiness feels so painfully obvious to us already and lends us no faith to imagine that any apologies we did make could arouse the kind of forbearance and kindness we crave, and yet so badly feel we don't deserve.
Hi, I'm Nicole Hockley from Sandy Hook Promise. I know this is hard to hear, but it's important.
Secondly, the ability to forgive. There can be equal difficulty around being able to accept an apology. To do so requires us to extend imaginative sympathy for why good people, which includes us, can end up doing some pretty bad things. Not because they are evil, but because they are, in their varied ways, tired or sad, worried or weak. A forgiving outlook lends us energy to look around for the most generous reasons why fundamentally decent people can, at points, behave less than optimally. When this kind of forgiveness feels impossible, therapists speak of a maneuver of the mind known as splitting, a tendency to declare some people to be entirely good and others just as simply entirely awful. In dividing humanity like this, we protect ourselves from what can feel like the impossible dangers of disappointment or grown-up ambivalence. Either someone is pure and perfect and we can love them without reserve, or quite suddenly they must be appalling and we can never ever forgive them. We cling to rupture because it confirms a story which, though deeply sad at one level, also feels very safe. That big emotional commitments are just too risky, that other people can't be trusted, that hope is an illusion, and that we are, basically, all alone. Thirdly, the ability to teach. Behind a rupture, there often lies a failed attempt by one person to teach something to another. There was something that they were trying to get across when they lost their temper or got into a sulk. Maybe something about how to behave around a parent, or what to do about sex, how to approach childcare, or handle money. And yet the effort went wrong, and they forgot all about the art of good teaching, an art which relies, to a surprising extent, on a degree of pessimism about the ability of another person to understand what we want from them. Good teachers aren't after miraculous outcomes. They know how resistant the human mind can be to new ideas. They swallow a very large dose of pessimism about successful interpersonal communication in order to stay calm and in a good mood around some of the inevitable frustrations of relationships. They don't shout because they didn't from the outset allow themselves to believe in total symmetries of mind. When they're trying to get something across, they don't push a point too hard. They give the listener time and know about defensiveness, and as a fallback, accept that they may have to respect two different realities. They can, in the end, bear to accept that they will always be a bit misunderstood, even by someone who loves them very much. Fourthly, the ability to learn. It can feel so much easier to get offended with someone than to dare to imagine that they might have something important to tell us. We may prefer to get hung up about how they informed us of an idea rather than address the substance of what they're actually trying to convey. It isn't easy to have to imagine that we are still beginners in a range of areas, but they can accept with good grace how flawed they remain. The good repairer is ultimately a good learner. That is, they have a lively and non-humiliating sense of how much they still have left to take on board. It isn't a surprise or a cause for alarm that someone might level a criticism at them. It's merely a sign that a kindly soul is invested enough in their development to notice areas of immaturity, and in the safety of a relationship to offer them something almost no one otherwise ever bothers with: feedback. In the Japanese tradition of kintsugi, broken pots and vases are artfully mended using a gold-inflected lacquer and displayed as precious works of art, as a way to emphasize the dignity and basic human importance of the art of repair. We should do something of the same with our love stories. It is a fine thing to have a relationship without moments of rupture, no doubt, but it is a finer and more noble achievement still to know how to patch things up repeatedly with those precious strands of emotional gold: self-acceptance, patience, humility, courage, and a lot of tenderness.
All right, so just to summarize, I guess this focused more on interpersonal relationships than I necessarily intended. But I hope there were things that you could pull for all sorts of different relationships that you have. So the skills of listening and reflecting, the skill of self-awareness and self-soothing, and ultimately a compassion for the imperfection of ourselves and others. Effective communication can minimize anxiety and frustration. It can grow trust in relationships, and it can keep people safe. I do feel like I have to add the asterisk of, always knowing when we have tried all of these things and a relationship still is not safe, we don't need to keep trying them. We can seek safety in other ways, but I hope these are good foundational skills in relationships that are already relatively safe. So I pulled from a lot of different places. I hope I kept us on track, but I could have gone into depth into almost all of these different concepts. If you ever want to talk about any of these things, either just in general or as they relate to you, it would be absolutely appropriate to schedule an appointment over here at the Counseling Center, of which you all have access to. And I think that is it. So let me stop sharing and turn it back over to Ryan. Did everything translate okay? You could see videos and hear audio and things?
Yes, everything was great. Do you guys have any questions for Elizabeth? It's okay if you have one and you don't want to speak, we'll look at the chat. Or like she said, if you want to speak privately, you can always go to the counseling center and set up an appointment.
Perfect. Oh, nope. Okay.
And I do have a couple of housekeeping things before we hop off of here. First, if you have not set up your check-in meeting with me, please go ahead and do so. And then second, we are going to do our raffle. Not all of you guys are going to be in this because some of you guys have already won the gift cards. So nobody gets 2 gift cards until everyone else has had a chance. So we have Tegan, Jose, and Kadir who are in for the drawing. Awesome. Kadir, stop by my office. You can pick that up anytime in the next 2 weeks. And then we'll do one more. Let's see. Awesome. And Jose, you can pick that up in our first check-in meeting. Awesome. Well, that's about all I had. Thank you so much for coming. And Elizabeth, thanks so much for putting this on.
Yeah, thank you. Hope to do it again.
Have a good day.